This evening, I'm so pleased to welcome Lynn Sherr to discuss her new biography of Sally Ride. I think we're all pretty familiar with the public persona of Sally Ride. Many young women, myself included, grew up wanting to be just like her. And thanks to this new book, we can feel like we know her better than ever. And the book really shows a more personal side while still showing, the well-known and compelling tale that is Sally Ride's story. The book clearly benefits from Ms. Sherr's access to Sally Ride's family and friends and their cooperation in her research, and she has some really nice anecdotes to share. And of course, Ms. Sherr herself is a longtime journalist with ABC News, where she covered a variety of topics, including the NASA Space Shuttle program. So we're so glad she's here with us tonight, and we're going to start off with a quick video. But first, join me in welcoming her to Politics and Prose.
This is, for all of my TV pals, all my ABC friends, this was done by the publisher. This is among their early forays into video. So actually, I'm very pleased with the way it turned out. It's just about 5 minutes long. I'm Lynn Sherr, and this is History in 5. And I'm going to tell you 5 incredible things about Sally Ride, America's first woman in space. On July 20th, 1969, Neil Armstrong became the first human to etch his footprint into lunar soil.
One small step for man.
A teenager back on Earth was among the untold billions watching closely that night, but had no idea that she too would one day make cosmic history. Sally was a baby boomer born in 1951, a valley girl from Encino, a Los Angeles suburb, who was a ranked junior tennis player. After her sophomore year in college, she realized she didn't have what it took, and she always joked that what kept her from turning pro was, quote, my forehand. Sally was fascinated by science, specifically astrophysics, the physics of astronomy. She was blessed with parents and teachers in high school and college who encouraged her scientific passion. And she confided in her best friend that she wanted to be famous by winning the Nobel Prize. Sally never considered a career at NASA because she didn't think women would ever be eligible to fly. It was only in 1977, when NASA spread a wide net to recruit women and minorities, that Sally got interested.
I want to get up as soon as I can. So that means that I'd like to be the first woman up, but I don't have any great desire to be the first woman.
Sally wasn't the first woman in space. 2 Russians beat her to orbit, Valentina Tereshkova in 1963 and Svetlana Savitskaya in 1982. But in 1978, Sally became one of the first 6 women chosen to train as NASA astronauts, 6 women in a class of 35 new guys.
I don't mind people asking me questions about what I'm going to do on orbit and whether I'm going to be doing any of the cooking on orbit, unless it's asked by someone who expects that the only reason that I'm flying is because Crip needs somebody to serve him coffee.
Sally's on this crew because she's well qualified to be here.
She and her colleagues trained exactly the same as the men, parasailing into shark-infested waters, practicing parachute landings, and she got totally hooked on flying.
There's really nothing that I'd rather be doing right now. What I really want to do is fly as many times as they'll let me fly.
Then, after 4 years of training, NASA selected Sally to be the first American woman to fly.
I do feel that there's some pressure for me to not mess up.
The publicity and the hoopla surrounding a U.S. female flyer made her an instant celebrity.
When there was a glitch or whatever, how did you respond? How do you take it as a human being? Do you weep? What do you do?
Why doesn't anybody ask Rick those questions?
T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4. We've gone for main engine start. We have.
She was 32 on June 18, 1983, when she lifted off in Challenger on STS-7.
Liftoff of STS-7 and America's first woman astronaut.
Sally felt the immense power of the rockets pushing her off the Earth. And 500,000 people lined the causeways near the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, cheering, "Ride, Sally, ride."
It sure is fun.
And then she floated blissfully throughout the cabin when they reached orbit. During the 7-day flight, Sally took in the view from the shuttle's windows.
Being able to put on a pressure suit and then open the hatch and step outside and have a view of essentially the universe out in front of you.
But she was especially riveted by the thin royal blue line of Earth's atmosphere. That's all there was, she'd later say. It's so clear from that perspective how fragile our existence is. Sally Ride was my friend for 30 years, but while I thought I knew her well, I really only learned about her by writing this biography. Sally was a fiercely private individual who avoided public appearances when she could and always preferred the company of one or two people to a crowd. Sally was a superb compartmentalizer who liked to control the narrative of her own life. And in an era when homosexuality was still not widely accepted, Sally kept her sexual orientation private. While at NASA, she was married to fellow astronaut Steve Hawley, a bond that lasted for 5 years. She then entered a relationship with another woman, Tam O'Shaughnessy, for more than a quarter century. Sally never talked about her life with Tam, never came out publicly, but wholly supported Tam's decision to reveal their partnership after her death from pancreatic cancer in 2012. So who was Sally Ride? She was a space traveler who saw herself as an educator. She wanted middle school girls to feel the excitement that she had felt, and no challenge matched the thrill of watching the neurons fire in a young girl's brain when she learned about science. Sally was especially intrigued by the possibilities on the planet Mars, and often told children that they'd be the ones to set foot there. "It might be one of you," she said, "and that will be cool. That will be very cool."
I was very honored that NASA chose me to be the first woman. It's time that people realize that women in this country can do any job that they want to do.
I hope you all are aware that it was this past week that was the 31st anniversary of Sally's flight. She took off, she landed yesterday 31 years ago exactly. So we are celebrating an anniversary, which is very exciting. And thank you all for being here, and thank you particularly all my ABC friends. And is that Frank? Yeah. My goodness, so many people here. It's great. Thank you for coming and letting me tell you some more about this terrific woman who was somebody I covered and was somebody who was my friend. That's a little bit about Sally. I'll tell you a little bit more. I will tell you that her name is now attached to a number of important things. Several schools around the country, an impact crater on the moon, an outer space science venture, and soon a ship, a research vessel, will be called the Sally K. Ride, and scientists will be able to look beneath the sea for exactly the kinds of things Sally was seeing up in the sky. Posthumously, she was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom by President Obama. In her lifetime, she played herself in an episode of the TV show Touched by an Angel, and she threw out the first pitch at a World Series game. She was regularly begged to run for office, any office, and often asked to be the NASA administrator. She turned them all down. Sally was way too private ever to take such a public job. Plus, Sally grew up and lived most of her life in Southern California, in the perfect climate of Southern California. And when one of her NASA colleagues said to her during one change of administration, "What would it take to get you to take the job of NASA administrator?" Sally said, "If they move it to California." She was also funny and mischievous, and as I said, my friend. And the thing is, her real name was indeed Sally Ride. I mean, how does that happen? But she was not the inspiration for the rock hit Mustang Sally with its wonderful chorus of Ride, Sally, Ride. In fact, Sally always used to say that she ran from that song her entire life. But I will tell you that at the launch, were any of you at the launch actually? Any of you covering it with me or there at the time? You were. The song you most heard was Ride, Sally, Ride, and my absolute favorite sign at the Kennedy Space Center was along the strip in Cocoa Beach. There was a restaurant, or excuse me, a bank that had a huge marquee, and it said, "Ride, Sally, Ride, and you guys can tag along too." Much more to Sally's liking was being acknowledged by Billy Joel in his song "We Didn't Light the Fire." Do you remember that one, where he listed, 56 historic figures or moments over the past 40 years to celebrate his own birthday? Sally Ride came between Wheel of Fortune and Heavy Metal Suicide. And Sally actually, as the song shot to the top of the Billboard Hot 100, Sally actually heard it on the radio for the first time and nearly drove off a cliff when she heard it. Billie Jean King, who was a good friend of hers, told me that Billie Jean also heard it for the first time on the radio, and that every time Billie Jean would hear the song, Billie Jean, still turns up the volume so she can catch Sally's name. And I do too. So why all the tributes and why the fuss about this woman? I want to just start with a cartoon. And this is when Sally died 2 years ago of pancreatic cancer at the age of 61. There were a number of cartoons, political cartoons in papers paying tribute to her. And most of them would show a constellation in the sky shaped with her initials, or there'd be the woman's symbol or whatever. But this is the one that I really liked. And it's a teenage girl's bedroom. And on the walls are pictures of space shuttles and rocket ships. And on the shelves are physics textbooks and astrophysics textbooks. And it's a surprisingly neat bedroom for a teenage girl. And she's sitting there with her ponytail, and she's looking at the TV monitor. And on the the computer monitor. And on the computer monitor is Sally's obituary. And it says Sally Ride, picture of Sally. Sally Ride, 1951, 2012. And standing behind her is her mom, in her mom jeans, and the girl is talking to her mom, and what she's saying, this is the caption, what she's saying is, "Wait, are you saying there was a time when there weren't any women astronauts?" Yes, indeed. This is really what Sally's story is about, and this is why she is so important. Sally, as I said in the video, did not grow up with astronaut dreams. She wanted to be a scientist, and then she thought she'd be a tennis player. And when that didn't work out, it was right back to science. She was totally committed to being a scientist, was quite sure she'd be an academic all of her life and do research. And one day she went to Stanford. She got her undergraduate, her master's and her PhD at Stanford in physics, astrophysics. And in January of 1977, she's finishing her last year of her PhD thesis, and she goes to the Stanford Student Union and she gets a cup of coffee and a donut to wake up before she goes to class. And she sits down and she picks up a copy of the Stanford Daily. And there, above the fold, is an article, big headline, that says, "NASA to recruit women." Sally reads the article, sees the requirements for this new category of astronaut called mission specialists, says to herself, "I can do that," puts down the paper, holds on to her coffee, goes into the next room, finds paper, pen, an envelope, and a stamp, it was that long ago, and sends off to NASA for an application immediately. This is a woman who was dead set on being an academic. She totally knew what she was going to do for the rest of her life. Boom, she pivots, turns on a dime. It totally changed her life. Some 25,000 people also sent in for that particular application. A little over 8,000 actually applied. Of them, 1,500 were women. Sally was chosen a year later, along with 34 other people. They were the first class of astronauts chosen just for the space shuttle program. And what was so unusual about it, as I said, is that for the first time, NASA was not only willing to allow women and minorities into the program, but they actually reached out for them. In the beginning, the space program was about men. It was about white men. They were very brave. They were very smart. They were very accomplished. They did miraculous things. But they all had, for the most part, they had military backgrounds. Not all of them, but in the very beginning, all of them had military backgrounds. That's mostly because President Eisenhower in the beginning said in 1958, in response to the Soviet Sputnik satellite that had been launched, if we're going to do a space program, a human spaceflight program, we want to fast track it, and therefore we need to get individuals who already have training, who already know how to fly jets, although this had nothing to do with flying a jet, and who understand danger and who are already vetted for security reasons. There was actually no reason whatsoever that women could not have flown in those early flights, but they chose to do it the other way, and so for the first nearly quarter century, that's really what it was. After the last men left the moon in 1972, we then had Skylab, we had the program with the Soviets who are now becoming our friends. But it wasn't until we had the space shuttle, which was a different kind of spacecraft, that they could actually reach out for more individuals. And the reason was in part because the space shuttle was like a plane. It was much bigger than the capsules that had taken our men to the moon. John Glenn used to joke that you didn't really get into a space capsule, you put it on. They were really small, those original ones. Now we have a space plane, the shuttle, which can handle crews of 7, 8, 9, lots of people. So they're looking for more individuals, and they're also looking for women and minorities because what they really want to add to the pilots are, the cohort of pilots is to add scientists. And this is where Sally finally got her chance. So now Sally is chosen to be an astronaut. This is quite an amazing thing for her. Sally was very private. She was absolutely an introvert. There's that Myers-Briggs psychology scale, and on one side are the I's for the introverts, and on the other side are the E's for the extroverts, and Sally was 100% on the I side. Didn't react much to anything, very cool under pressure, made her a perfect astronaut, of course. But when she got the call saying in January of 1978 saying that she had made it, she jumped up and down screaming, was so excited, calls up her best friend, the one in the picture, to whom she said, I want to win the Nobel Prize, calls up her friend answers the phone, and Sally says, hi there, this is your friendly local astronaut calling. And that's the way she identified herself for the rest of the time to that woman. Sally's parents shared the glory in their own idiosyncratic way. Her father, who taught political science at a community college in Santa Monica, Sally said, this being an astronaut has just solved my dad's problem. She said, when I said I was going to be an astrophysicist, he had not a clue how to explain to his friends what I did. Now that I'm an astronaut, it's fine. He knows what that is. Her mother spun it differently, with Sally going into space and her sister studying for the ministry. Joyce Ride said, oh, well, one of them will get to heaven. But before she got there, Sally learned that being elevated to the astronaut corps also meant facing a press corps with very little imagination. This is January of 1978. 2 Russian women have flown. We know almost nothing about them. And now there are 6 women being named to the astronaut corps. So Sally, the academic, she's out at Stanford, remember, goes to her first press conference, never in her life been at a press conference, and she is subject to questions like, aren't you afraid of being in orbit with all those men? And then we had, do you expect to run into any UFOs? Sally calmly answered no to the latter and assured the former that her academic career as an astrophysics student had made her very comfortable around males. I first met Sally in 1981 when ABC asked me to join our team covering the then upcoming Space Shuttle program. And Those of you obviously remember we had a great team that was prepared to do that. We had an anchor man named Frank Reynolds who had covered all the Apollo and the Gemini and Mercury flights and was very, very knowledgeable. He was terrific. We had a science correspondent who had practically invented the field named Jules Bergman, who could not be beat, but they wanted someone else. And I've described my addition to the team as I was the color guy in the baseball booth. So I was there to sort of do the feature stories and the sideline things. For a variety of reasons, I wound up anchoring everything up until the Challenger explosion, and it was a great assignment. But my very first assignment on my first trip to the Johnson Space Center in Houston was to do a story on the so-called new breed of astronauts. That's these mission specialists who are no longer the hotshot pilots. And Sally was one of the people that NASA gave us to interview. And the two of us just hit it off instantly. I liked her manner. I liked her sense of humor. I loved the fact that she spoke English and not techno talk, and the fact that she acknowledged unequivocally that she would not be there if it were not for the women's movement, that she didn't do this alone, that this was something that had taken a lot of social pressure, and she was very proud of that. I also asked her at one point in my very first interview in 1981, why do you want to go into space? And I was expecting, you know, one of these cocky responses and one of these canned responses that a jet pilot would give you. Sally said, I don't know. She said, I've discovered that half the people would love to go into space and there's no need to explain it to them. But if someone doesn't, and the other half can't understand, and I couldn't explain it to them. If someone doesn't know why, she said, I can't explain it, which I thought was quite refreshing in this fraternity of white male fighter pilot jocks. As the program developed and I wound up anchoring ABC's coverage, we spent a lot of time together. We bonded over cold shrimp and funny stories at a variety of dives in and around the Johnson Space Center, including one that always promised mud wrestling on Friday nights that we managed to avoid. When she married her fellow astronaut Steve Hawley, their home became my beer and pizza hangout during other people's missions. Sally, of course, got her big chance 5 years later, 5 years after she got to NASA. And I think she was the right choice. Any one of the 6 women would have done us proud. They're all very talented. They're all very accomplished. They all would have been terrific. I really think Sally was the right choice for a variety of reasons. She was daring. She was an optimist. She trained endlessly. She answered questions tirelessly. But all of that attention on her was very trying. And it did culminate in what I do believe is the single dumbest question ever asked of anyone at any press conference anywhere. And I've been at a lot of press conferences. And that was the question that you saw in the video, and it was asked by a fellow from Time magazine who at the final pre-flight press conference actually said to Sally, what happens when there's a problem? Do you weep? There was a gasp from the audience, as there was in this room when you all heard it before. I was sitting and there was a lot of eyeball rolling. What is extraordinary about Sally, though, and you saw her reaction, is how she responded. She didn't go for the guy's eyes. She didn't say a nasty, horrible thing. She laughed. She smiled. She turns to Rick Houck, who was the pilot of her crew, and says, why doesn't anyone ever ask Rick these questions? And defuses the entire thing. It was absolutely brilliant. I'm sure that NASA was high-fiving itself, the managers in the back room, when this happened. Another male reporter actually asked Sally, did you ever wish you were a boy? Sally gritted her teeth, I've seen the video, and said, no, I never thought about it. Within NASA, there were a few other hurdles they had to leap. The 6 women, when Sally was chosen, she suddenly had to make a lot of decisions about things like what kinds of things would go in the personal toiletries kit that they took aloft, that kind of thing. Sally was smart enough to immediately bring in the other 5 women and say, we are doing this as a group, because she knew that any decision she made was going to devolve on the next person, and then the next, and then the next. So they did manage to get the Old Spice aftershave lotion and the British Sterling deodorant replaced by some more female-friendly lotions and potions. And they also managed to get NASA to add what only NASA could refer to as hair restraints. We call them rubber bands. But it wasn't just NASA and it wasn't just the press. When the original launch date was moved back a couple of months to accommodate a schedule change, it wasn't a delay, they were just shifting things around. Johnny Carson joked on The Tonight Show that the space shuttle had been delayed so that Sally Ride could get a purse to match her shoes. I have screened all of the Johnny Carson jokes about Sally over that period. They only got worse. They were awful, frat house gags. I am very happy to tell you that the audience, over time, ignored him and then started booing him. The idea of an American woman in space had gone from becoming a punchline to a matter of national pride. The entire nation was riding with Sally when she lifted off in June of 1983. Just before she went, I got my one-on-one interview. That's the interviews that you saw in the video. And I asked her, look, do you feel under any special pressure because you're the first American woman? And she said, yes, I do feel under pressure. I feel pressure not to mess up. And what she meant was she felt pressure not to mess up for her crew. Any space mission is a group effort, and it's a team event. And she wanted to do well for the crew. She wanted to do well for the mission. She wanted to do well for NASA. She wanted to do well for the United States. And she wanted to do well for the future of human spaceflight. But overall, I think she wanted to do well for women, because she understood that if she messed up her term, that it would be said that no woman can ever fly again because one woman messed up. And she understood that if she did well, that would open the door for all the rest of them. And listen to this comment from a female astronaut from a later generation, a woman by the name of Pamela Milroy, who not only flew but also commanded the space shuttle, one of the few women to have done that. Here's what she says. She says, "It wasn't until after I became an astronaut that I discovered the most important gift that Sally gave me, which is that she was tremendously competent. The reputation of everyone who comes after you depends on how well you do. Sally opened those doors and smoothed the path for all women because she was very good at what she did." And I think that's really the secret of why this mission was so important and why her choice was so critical. She was also, I will tell you, not only good, but really playful. The night before the launch, the afternoon before the launch, her picture was on every magazine cover. She was the most famous person on the planet. Every reporter at the Kennedy Space Center, of course, wanted to see her, wanted to interview her. Astronauts are put in quarantine for a couple of days before they fly so that we humans don't give them any stray germs that could really, really screw up the mission. So Sally was in quarantine, and everybody, of course, wanted to know, how's Sally, what's going on? And it was just a lid on the whole thing. So I'm sitting in our ABC News workspace, which of course was a trailer, our glamorous workspace, the day before, working on my script for that night's piece. And the phone rings, and someone picks it up and says, "Lynn, it's for you." And I pick up the phone, and this little voice at the other end says, "Hi there, what are you doing in 5 minutes?" I said, "I don't know, Sally. What am I doing in 5 minutes?" She said, "Walk outside your trailer, turn left, go down the gravel path, and stop." So I did that, and there was Sally in cutoffs, a T-shirt, flip-flops, leaning against a car 25 yards away and waving at me. And what she was doing was saying, she was, number one, pushing the envelope a little bit, because the rules were no contact with the press, and Sally understood that she could do things her way a little bit without really breaking the rules. She also wanted me to see that she was smiling and happy, and she also wanted to give me something to report that night on the air, that Sally Ride was doing very well. Thank you very much. This is the way that I actually remember her best. So off she goes on that beautiful, gorgeous June morning. They had a perfect flight, an absolutely perfect flight. And one of my stand-up closes that week said, "Technologically, NASA is pushing towards the 21st century, but in human terms, it has finally entered the 20th. And I did have a little trouble getting that stand-up through, I might point out. This will not surprise you, William. I also took my mother to the launch. My mother was pushing 80, and loved it. And afterwards, she said it was perfect. She said, "I saw the horse and buggy, I saw the airplane, and now this." I felt really good. When they landed a week later at Edwards Air Force Base in California, President Reagan telephoned his congratulations and said to Sally, "Somebody said that sometimes the best man for the job is a woman. You were there because you were the best person for the job," which I think is absolutely true. And millions of people around the world agree, particularly women, particularly young women. They translated her bold journey into their own tickets to success. And the thinking was, if she can do that, I can do anything. Whether it was getting out of the typing pool or getting into medical school or whatever many, many women wanted to do, this really opened the door for an awful lot of women. Sally had a wonderful time. She worked very hard. But one of the things that she did is what all astronauts do, is when things got a little slow, which was rare, she would drift over to the window and look back at Earth. And that image that she saw of the Earth with the Earth's atmosphere totally changed her life. She said it was as if someone had taken a royal blue crayon and drawn a line around the Earth. And sometimes she changed the metaphor. She would say, that line is as thin as the fuzz on a tennis ball. Or she'd say it was the Earth's spacesuit. And that's our atmosphere. That's the only thing that's protecting us from the harsh reality of outer space. Without that atmosphere, none of us would be here. We could not survive. And that's when she began to understand the fragility of this planet that we live on, and directed a huge amount of her life towards getting science and government and children interested in doing something about protecting the Earth. That was just the beginning of Sally's contributions to the planet and to NASA. After the Challenger explosion, of course, she served on the Rogers Commission, which investigated that. And as it turns out, became the source. I did not know this until I found this while researching the book. She was the source, an early source of the critical revelation about the O-rings and their contribution to the accident and also to the flawed management decisions that were made. With NASA essentially shut down to repair the system and reconfigured the program, Sally moved here to Washington, where she undertook a major study at NASA headquarters to help determine the future of the space agency. And that's the one in which she recommended first something called Mission to Planet Earth, which was treating Earth as an exotic planet, the same way we look at Mars and Venus and everything else out there, and expending some of our vast energy and wisdom on fixing what's going on here, but not only before, but at the same time as we are going other places. This was a huge step forward. Over the years, she served on other commissions and also on the investigative commission when the Columbia disintegrated in 2003 on its re-entry to Earth. She was the only shuttle astronaut to serve on both commissions and made a huge contribution to that one also. Once Sally was the bright new face of NASA, and now she became its conscience. She really cared about the space agency, really wanted to fix it when something went wrong. And later in life, when she had left NASA, she worked with NASA on many, many projects. She got them to put a camera in space, first on the shuttle and then on the space station, and hooked it in with kids' classrooms so that youngsters could sit in a classroom, punch buttons, and take pictures of parts of the Earth that they wanted to study. She called that one EarthCam. And then when someone else was sending up some satellites to do some research in orbit around the moon, Sally put a camera on those satellites and got kids in school to be able to take pictures of the moon, and she called that one MoonCam. She was always giving back with kids. This is really what she wanted to do. And that's what she was really building up to. Being first was fine, but she didn't want to be the only one. She wanted to awaken young female minds to the wonder of science that she had experienced, that had captivated her. She wanted to inspire the next generation of America's engineers and mathematicians and astronauts. And she wanted to teach them, as she had grown up believing, that if you're a girl, you can, in fact, do anything. She wanted them to see beyond the stereotypes, and she wanted it to be a for-profit company because she thought that would be the way to attract the most talent. She said over and over, we need to make science cool again. So she and a couple of partners started a company called Sally Ride Science, which still exists, and its sole purpose is to get middle school girls, and boys as well, interested in math and science and technology and get them committed to it. So that's the woman that I knew, a smart and witty pal who she would come to stay with me in New York, and she would go out and slay dragons during the day. And at night I would come home and find her flopped on my living room floor with her shoes off, with her legs on the coffee table, watching television. She was, as I say, a superb compartmentalizer, able to focus like a laser. Her roommate at Stanford said she could study through a whistling tea kettle. And then Sally told another reporter she was also able to go home at night and, quote, flip the switch marked oblivious. She could just disappear into Star Trek, into Star Wars, or many other less accomplished things that she watched. There were, of course, these things I did not know about Sally, but as I say, she was a very private individual, kept a lot of things. I did not know she had been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer and only had 17 months to live. I did not know she had been living with Tam. And I didn't really appreciate the psychic price she had paid for all of her fame. This was very costly to her. This is a woman who really did prefer being in the library stacks or being by herself or with one friend. And she made thousands, tens of thousands of speeches and had to psych herself up for every single one. But she understood that she had flown at government expense, that we had paid the way, that it was a government agency, and that public relations was part of the give back. And she went out there and she just did it. I think her legacy is completely secure. In the course of writing this book, more than 200 interviews with her family and close friends and colleagues, I learned things about her I had no idea about, but I found the same extraordinary woman I'd known when I covered her. She was, at base, a California girl who wanted to save the planet, an introvert whose radiant spirit pulled her into public service. She was an academic who could explain raindrops to a class full of college students and the wonders of weightlessness to a room full of little girls. She was really lucky with her parents, very progressive individuals. Her father was a Purple Heart in World War II, an Eisenhower Republican. Her mother was a complete lefty who loved the fact that her vote canceled out her husband's every single time. They both believed in education. Sally was lucky because of the emphasis on science that this country adopted after the Sputnik. Sally was a little girl in 1957 when Sputnik went up, and she benefited from all that. I was in high school. Perhaps some of you did the same thing. I remember going outside in my backyard on a very cold November night and looking up and seeing this thing going around, this thing that really started the space race and the space age. And you turned on the radio and it went beep, 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 and it was really scary. Sally benefited from the push to science after that. She benefited from the women's movement. She did not plan her life far in advance, and when opportunity knocked, she was ready to open the door and sail right through it. I think, and I used to tell her this, that what she did in that Stanford Union that day when she read the article that said NASA was looking for women, the fact that she could change her career plans like that she could just move on it, I thought it was a great lesson. Sally took a different moral from that moment, and she would deadpan to student audiences, I guess the message is, read your college newspaper. And she did it all with a smile. When she returned from that first flight, she flew twice, in June of '83. After all the work she had done, she said from the tarmac, the thing I'll remember most about this flight is that it was fun. In fact, I'm sure it was the most fun I'll ever have in my life. She was 32 years old. She had plenty of fun later on. But years later, she elaborated, facing an auditorium filled with 1,000 youngsters. Imagine a room twice this size, and she would say to the kids, imagine this room in space. You could do 35 somersaults in a row. She would say, my favorite thing about space was being weightless. There's not even a close second, and every eye in the room would be huge and wide, and all those kids would immediately sign up to be astronauts. Sally was an icon to kids and to grown-ups alike. She was 5'5½", but she could intimidate the best of them. As one colleague put it, it was only after you left her presence that you realized she was really short. It was that ability to be bigger than you actually are. She was a child of the Eisenhower years who was inspired by Kennedy, marched against Nixon, flew under Reagan, and then advised Clinton and Obama. always capturing and challenging the mood of our times to change our world. Flying in space was neither her childhood goal nor her adult commitment, but having done it twice, she cherished the adventure. I actually call what I've learned from Sally flying lessons, because she taught me, and I think she can teach all of us, how to fly high without ever leaving the earth. I think her life reminds us that whatever our own personal limits, there is always something out there grander than we can measure, more marvelous than we can imagine, that something that is just waiting to be explored. She proved that you don't need the right plumbing to have the right stuff in any field, in any endeavor. And after smashing through the ultimate glass ceiling without messing up, her term, I think she brought back the ultimate lesson. She was asked over and over, what did you see out there? What was it like? What did you see? And Sally, who incidentally, her undergraduate degree in physics, she had a double major as an undergraduate. She also had also majored in English, which I truly hate her for. She was a Shakespearean, can you imagine? So when she was asked this question, Sally put science and eloquence together, and she translated the dazzling reality that she saw out there into a beam of encouragement for the rest of us on Earth. What did she see out there? I'm going to repeat the words that you saw on the screen. She would say, the stars don't look bigger, but they do look brighter. I think it's exactly the kind of message you want to hear from the first American woman in space, an optimist, a sunny, can-do person who made us all believe that this is a wonderful way to live our lives. Thank you very much. Thank you.
So we do have some time left for questions. If you have a question, please do come to our audience microphone here on the side.
Be brave. But don't ask me about weeping.
This one ought to be easy. And I apologize for almost changing the subject, but I'm curious about the Soviet women, the two Soviet women in space.
Right, the two
you said
Soviet
we
women.
were really sort of lost track of
Right.
knowledge of them. Has no one written anything roughly
Part of
comparable to
the
your
question. The
work
question
here?
is about the two Soviet female cosmonauts, Valentina Tereshkova in 1963 and Svetlana Savitskaya in 1982. We don't know a huge amount about them. Valentina, in particular, her flight was dismissed by Americans who really knew nothing about it. And they sort of poo-pooed it and said she didn't really do a very good job. That, if I'm not mistaken, has been proven to be false. She did a fine job. But this was not the Soviet Union suddenly making a stand on behalf of women, because no woman flew again for almost 20 years. We don't know a whole lot about her. We know a lot more about Svetlana, who was a very accomplished flyer. And there is a wonderful story that I tell in the book, and I'll just give you the bare outline of it for now. Sally, after her flight, is on the publicity tour, the post-flight publicity tour that they all have to do. And one of the places they go is Budapest for an international aeronautics, astronautics Federation meeting. And this was, remember the Korean Airlines jet that was shot down by the Russians in 1983? And this was right after that. So the State Department said to Sally and Rick Houck, the pilot, and both of their spouses, no fraternizing with the enemy. Our Cold War enemy was at that moment behaving very badly, and we had terrible relationships. And they said, we don't want any front page pictures of you all drinking vodkas and toasting each other and having a wonderful time. Stay away from the cosmonauts. So they thought, terrific, we will do that. They get there and they're behaving. And all of a sudden, Sally at one reception feels a tap on her shoulder, and here's Sally, and she turns around, and there is Svetlana. So here is Sally Ride, who has just 1 month earlier become the first American woman in space, meeting for the first time one of only two other women who have ever been in space, and she's dying to talk to her. And I won't give it all away now. I will tell you there was a secret meeting, and it was quite extraordinary, and it formed a lifetime bond for the two of them. So once again, Sally sort of pushed the envelope a little bit and figured, I can bend the rules as long as no one gets hurt. No, in fact, no one knew this story fully until I've told it in the book. So the State Department only now is finding out about it.
Other questions?
No
Everyone
questions.
wants to get their book signed.
Okay, well
Thank you so much.
that's great. Thank you all for coming.